Imagine this. A man wakes up in an ordinary parking lot in Germany. But this isn't just any parking lot. This was once the Führerbunker, the place where Adolf Hitler spent his final days in 1945. He's disoriented, his head pounding like he's just been hit by a truck, and there's that strange toothbrush mustache. The year is 2022, and somehow Adolf Hitler is alive again. What happens next? What could this man possibly feel after coming face to face with a world that's so drastically different from the one he once knew? We'll dive into this unsettling journey of realization, but first, let's imagine another colossal resurrection, this time, the Titanic. Hooked in time. What if we could raise the Titanic from the depths of the ocean? Can you even imagine it? A ship once hailed as unsinkable, now lying in ruins beneath the waves for over a century. Its grand halls, majestic stairs, and luxurious suites now part of the ocean floor's graveyard. But what if we could bring it back? Is it worth it? Could it even be done? In 1961, the Swedish managed to raise a 17th century warship that had been underwater for more than 3 centuries. The Vasa, at 70 meters long, was lifted from its watery grave and restored, even turned into a museum. So why not the Titanic? The idea of resurrection. You may think it's just a pipe dream, but there are reasons why people want to attempt it. First, there's the obvious: preservation. The Titanic is in grave danger of disappearing. Bacteria, especially one called Halomonas titanicae, have been slowly devouring the ship's iron for decades, threatening to leave it as a heap of rust. If the wreck isn't lifted soon, much of it could be lost forever. Then there's the issue of looting. Since the Titanic's location was discovered in 1985, auction houses have been cashing in by selling relics pulled from the wreck. By bringing the Titanic up in its entirety, we could end this exploitation and ensure that its remaining artifacts are preserved for history, not sold for a profit. The challenges of raising a Titanic. But let's pause for a moment. Why hasn't the Titanic been raised already? It's not as simple as just sending a team of divers down with a rope. The depths are staggering, about 3,800 meters below the surface. To put that in perspective, the deepest wreck recovery in history was a Soviet submarine, raised in 1974 from a depth of 4,900 meters, almost 5 kilometers deep. The project cost billions, and even then, it only succeeded in raising part of the submarine. So, the Titanic? That's another beast entirely. Striking impossibilities. Over the years, several outlandish ideas have been proposed for the Titanic's recovery. Some suggested filling polyester bags with 180,000 tons of Vaseline and placing them inside the hull to create buoyancy. In theory, this would raise the ship, but the pressure at that depth could cause the bags to burst. Others considered using blocks of ice. After all, the Titanic sank after colliding with a giant ice mass. What if we recreated that scenario, freezing the ship in nitrogen gas, which would turn into solid ice and, in theory, bring the ship back to the surface? Yet, it would require millions of tons of nitrogen, not to mention the problem of actually lifting the ship for the mists of ice to surround it. Odd proposals, bigger problems. Then there's the absurd suggestion of filling the Titanic with ping-pong balls. A bizarre idea, but one that's actually been tested with smaller ships, where 27,000 ping-pong balls were used to raise a small boat from the bottom of a lake. While this worked, the Titanic's depth and pressure make this approach laughable. And let's not forget the giant magnet proposal, using a huge magnet to pull the Titanic up, but this would only lift parts of the wreck. It's clear, raising the Titanic is not just a difficult task, it's a near impossible one. The big piece. In 1996, a company tried to salvage a 20-ton section of the Titanic using floating diesel-filled floaters. Unfortunately, as they were nearly at the surface, the rope snapped and the piece plummeted back down. But that wasn't the end of the story. In 1998, they returned, and this time, they succeeded in bringing the section up. The big piece, a 20-ton fragment of the Titanic, is now on display in Las Vegas. A small success, but it's just a fraction of the massive ship lying on the ocean floor. What happens to the rest? So, what about the rest of the Titanic? Experts agree that the ship is in terrible shape. The salty ocean water has eroded much of the hull, and it's covered in rust. Bacteria like Halomonas titanici are slowly eating away at the metal, weakening its structure. In fact, many predict that within a decade or two, the Titanic will no longer be recognizable. If it isn't raised, the entire ship could crumble into nothingness. The dilemma. Now, here's the real question. Should we try to recover the Titanic before it's completely gone, or is it better left as a grave? Some believe we should try to recover as much as we can before it's lost forever, preserving it for future generations. Others, though, argue that it's better to leave the ship undisturbed, especially considering the 1,500 lives that were lost on that fateful night. And then there are oceanographers who have been diving to the wreck for years, and they found no evidence of human remains, suggesting the harsh conditions of the ocean have taken care of that for us. Ethics and preservation. To make matters more complicated, UNESCO has stepped in. Since 2012, the Titanic has been under protection, marking the 100th anniversary of the sinking. The ship is now considered a cultural heritage site, and any efforts to disturb the wreck require special permission. While some want to turn it into a museum, others want to leave it as a memorial, a grave that should not be disturbed. Visiting the Titanic. For those curious about the wreck, there's always the option to go on an expedition. For a hefty sum, around $250,000, you can dive down to see the Titanic with your own eyes. Only about 200 people have taken this journey, and the cost is prohibitive for most. But it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for those who can afford it. What should we do? So, what should happen to the Titanic? Should it be raised and restored, or is it better left where it lies? And what about the people who perished? Should we disturb the wreck at all? The answer is unclear, but one thing is for sure, the Titanic's fate will be debated for years to come. What do you think? Should we attempt to save what remains of the Titanic, or is it better to leave it as a part of history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, no matter what happens, the Titanic will always be a symbol of human ambition, tragedy, and the passage of time. Stay curious. Bye-bye.